I wonder if Elijah knew that it would be a whirlwind. Elijah was ready to go home. He must have sensed that the time had come. The prophet had done all that the Lord had asked of him. For Yahweh, as we have learned, is what God calls himself, is his name. And now it was time for Elijah's reward. His eyes were going to see the God whom he had served, and he would live. His journey was complete. Well, you'll remember, if you were with us last week, that when we last left Elijah, he was in a cave waiting for his depression to lift. God had given him strength for the journey and bread and water, told him to take that power nap. And in the earthquake, wind, and fire, and finally in a gentle whisper of hope, he's called forth from the cave, and there with the mantle that he was wearing drawn across his face, he hears the healing words of Jesus, of God, who says to him, "Go back where you came from." And he gave him yet another mission to finish. And so now he's finished that. He's gone home. He's on his way there. You see, God doesn't leave us in a cave. God doesn't leave you in a cave of darkness. God calls us to move forward, to finish the journey, still providing the strength that we always need to finish well. The journey doesn't end in a cave. It ends in a whirlwind. And the path from the cave through the Jordan is one which God invites each of us to walk. You see, the journey home is not one, though, that we ever take alone. God provides us companions along the way. So in addition to this destination that God gives us and a path to get there, God gives us companions. Now, the things about companions is this: sometimes we don't get to choose them. God provides them. And then the rest is up to us to work out that companionship. So God had chosen Elisha to be Elijah's successor. And throughout these Elijah and Elisha stories, the decision to pair these men in ministry clearly is God's choice, not Elijah's choice. I don't know if Elijah just didn't like working with people in general, or if he didn't like Elisha, but it's pretty clear even from this story, he wasn't real happy to have Elisha as the one who was following after him. You see, that sometimes happens, of course, when we're mentors, right? When we're called to train our successor. Many of us who have been in that situation, when we have to train our replacement, we're faced with this odd question of, how can this young man ever learn everything that I know? And of course they don't have to, because they're going to do it their own way anyway. But still we feel a little bit threatened. We say, will this young woman be more popular, more successful than me? But still, there he was. This Elisha, who's trailing alongside Elijah on the last leg of Elijah's journey home. He really just wants to go home alone. He just says, leave me alone. I want to go on this path. So you stay here, Elisha. I'm moving on. Moving on from Gilgal to Bethel to Jordan. And Elisha, despite the fact that Elijah's trying to shake him, says, no. I'm not going to do it. As surely as the Lord, Yahweh, lives, I will not leave you. So they come to the Jordan River, and Elijah takes up, I don't know how many times I'll make that mistake. That's one of the curious things I want to find out, from God about why give these guys names that are so similar. But Elijah and Elisha are walking along. They come to the River Jordan, and Elijah takes his mantle, and he takes that mantle, and he just strikes the water, the Jordan River parts, and they walk through. Like this is an everyday occurrence. The Bible sort of doesn't highlight it much at all. And I wonder if that's because for Elijah, this maybe had become second nature, that he was so used to having the power of God that he could part water, that it didn't faze him at all to do it. Well, of course I have to get across that river. Boom, it's gone. The path is made. That's what God does for his servants. God makes a way where there seems to be no way. You have to get to the other side of the river. If you're working in the power of God, God makes a way. God takes us from the cave. God gives us a destination. God gives us a path he makes a way. And then he's still got these companions that come along. Elisha, I imagine, looks at that, and his eyes get big as saucers and say, wow, look at what he just did. And now we're just walking through to the other side of the Jordan, so they're all alone. And then this mantle comes back into play. Now, the idea of a mantle is one that is a little bit foreign to us, maybe. But I think if you think about a mantle, a cloak, as sort of his uniform. Now, you know, sometimes, like when we do the sacraments, I'll wear a robe. It's sort of a mantle. Not that it makes me any more special, but it sort of conveys the idea that, you know, we want to recognize the authority of God in these sacraments that we're performing, as we will do with baptism in a couple of weeks. And there are other ways that we sort of see uniform. It's just a piece of cloth. It's just a piece of clothing. You know, when you see that man or woman in the blue uniform with a shiny thing on their chest, it doesn't like invoke, suddenly, there's my friend, especially if it's accompanied by lights on a car. It's a symbol of authority. It's really just a person with a piece of blue cloth, but you get it? That's, so it's like a mantle, a cloak of authority. Or you think, now, Tim and Daniel, they didn't come in their dress uniform today, but we've seen them come sometimes in that, or when others have been home and they come in their dress uniforms. And it's sort of like, whoa, look at that. Because it sort of gives this idea of they have the authority of the United States Army right here in our midst. It's a symbol of authority. It's a symbol of power. It's a symbol of strength. That's what that mantle was. That's what that mantle was. Just like when we see somebody walk in those dressed uniforms, wow. That's what it was like for Elisha. He sees that mantle. It's just broken apart the waters. Wow. Look at that mantle. And so he thinks that I would like to have that mantle. And so, you know, they go along, and Elijah says to Elisha, unable to shake him, he finally says to him, knowing he's not going to get rid of him until he asks him this question, well, what do you really want me to do for you? Let me do something to you so I can go. And Elisha says, give me a double portion of your blessing. And here's what he's saying. He's saying, what I really want, Elijah, is for you to treat me like a son. And that's what it means. You see, in those days, under the rules, the law of inheritance that were in Elijah and Elisha's time, the oldest son of a father would receive a double portion as compared to the other children, and that wouldn't be so today, but that's the way it was then for various reasons. And so Elisha is saying to Elijah, give me a double portion. Treat me like your son, like your firstborn son. There's this movie called Finding Forrester. I recommend it. PG-13, a little bad language, but, you know, close your ears for that part. So, Finding Forrester. And Forrester is a guy who's written this novel. And it's a really, it's a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. And he stopped after one novel. And so he's a recluse living up on the third floor of an apartment building in Brooklyn. And in the community, this has now become an African-American community. And there's all these African-American young men playing basketball, high school-age boys across the street playing basketball, and he watches them. He watches the bird through his window. He becomes known as the window man because they can see him, but he's never outside of the window. And so as a dare, one time, Jamal, one of the young men, takes the dare from his buddies, and he's going to go up, and he sneaks up the fire escape ladder, and he sneaks into Forrester's room, and he's supposed to take something as proof that he's done it for his buddies. But before he can do so, and he set his backpack down to pick up something to take with him, and suddenly Forrester comes out and scares him, and he runs down, and he's left it there. And so eventually, Forrester opens up this backpack and he finds Jamal's writings, and they're beautiful writings. The boy is obviously a very gifted writer, but he doesn't have any mentors to help him learn what it means to be to use the gift that God has given him. So Forrester edits these books, and he throws the backpack down from the window down on the street. Jamal picks it up, and to make a long story short, what happens is that Jamal gets into this special school for gifted children, and he keeps coming back to Forrester, just like Elisha to Elijah. And Forrester says to him, well, are we going to keep meeting like this? At first, he won't even let him in. He just sort of opens the little thing that he can look out through the door. But eventually they come in, and eventually they learn to write together. But the real point of the story is this. Just as Forrester helps Jamal find his gift, Jamal helps Forrester find what he's missing. And that is the ability to get outside, the ability to go see the world, the ability to be part of the world. And so, the last scene is Forrester. Well, if you watch a movie now, I've spoiled it. But I have to finish it this way because it makes a point. It's still worth watching. Forrester dies. And the last scene is a lawyer coming to Jamal, and he hands him the keys to this apartment. He's inherited what Forrester had. He's received not only the gift of his teaching, but he's received a double portion. They've become father and son, this white man, this African-American boy, and they've become one family. That's what happens with Elijah and Elisha. Against Elijah's wishes, Elisha just keeps coming back. Give me a double portion. Help me be one with you. Be family for me. And so they do. Well, as they're across the river, finally, the whirlwind happens. The whirlwind is going to happen for you too. The whirlwind is the promise that comes at the end if you make this journey from the cave through the desert across the Jordan. The whirlwind is going to come. But what makes this whirlwind so important is what Elisha sees with it. He sees this chariot of fire, these horses of fire, which are the greatest symbols of authority there can be, that God uses to demonstrate his protection of Elijah. Father, Father, the chariots and horses of fire. Tim, Daniel, you won't see them. Friends, you won't see them, but you can believe they're there, protecting you. Wherever your work brings you, wherever your life brings you. Pray for the eyes of faith to see the chariots of fire, the horses of fire, the presence of God. You see, it's not that the chariots and horses take Elijah away. That's not their purpose. It's the whirlwind that takes Elijah away. The chariots of fire, the horses of fire, are there to provide the protecting power of God, of Yahweh. May it be so over your lives. Whenever I tell this story, and I'm going to finish with this, I think back to when I began in this job in 2009. And there was, at that point, an elder. Many of you will know him, but many of you will not. His name was Ron Bimmel. And Ron was in his 80s. And he was serving as an elder for the umpteenth time. And Ron was sort of a mentor to me. He was a mentor to me. And as I was learning the ropes of the job, here's what I learned to do. I would say to Ron, here's what I'm thinking about doing. And if he said, no, we're not going there, I would know that would be the end, and that would be the end of that. I really wouldn't need to go any further. But if I would say, Ron, here's what I'm thinking about doing, and he would say, I can go along with that, then I could do it. I got it. I had the authority of Ron Bimmel that I could do this. I was really looking forward to working with Ron for the rest of his time. He was just in his first year of his serving in consistory. And it was my first weekend away, my first Sunday off, and I was in Michigan visiting my family. And I was sitting in the living room of actually I think we were in the dining room, and my phone rang. And I went into the living room to answer it, and it was St. Nicholas Hospital, and the chaplain there. And the chaplain called me and said, are you Bill T. Winkle? Yes. Pastor at Hope Church? Yes. Well, I have some news for you. Ron Bimmel died. Well, I was speechless. And I remember that because there are very few times I'm speechless. I came home and had to think about what to say. So I used this story in my funeral sermon for Ron, and I reread it this week. And what I think about is how Ron and I were mentors. We both benefited. I guess that's what I really want to say, right? That Elijah and Elisha, Forrester and Jamal, it's a two-way street, this being a mentor. So Ron agreed to, which meant the rest of the consistory could agree to have communion served in a new way, where we would come up and we'd hand the bread, the body of Christ broken for you, the cup of blessing, the blood of Christ shed for you. And I would be sitting here, and I'd be standing here, and then Ron would be here next to me, and I could look over at Ron. And Ron really was filled with the Holy Spirit. And as he would say, the blood of Christ shed for you, you could see the tears coming down his face, over his smile. So, you see, we helped each other. I hope you'll find someone to mentor. I hope that you'll find someone who you will help, who God will send you to be that person that you can help know the love of Jesus Christ. And I assure you that person will give you strength to finish the journey in a whirlwind. One of the funeral meals this week, we had two, and I was downstairs and watching the women do this. It doesn't have to be women only, but it happens to be only women who are doing these funeral meals. So, they're down there doing this work. And there's the old crew, and there's the new crew, not necessarily by age, but those with experience and those getting new experience. And one of the new crew said, someday this is all going to be mine. The mentors and the mentees. And I'll tell you why I'm going to end with that story. Is because in the kitchen, the mantle is a towel. And that mantle is really important because, as we talk about on Maundy Thursday, the towel is the mantle of Jesus Christ. And that towel gets passed from person to person within the church. We all have access to the towel. What happened at the end of this story is Elisha sees that Elijah is gone. And what he really knows, to prove that he's gone, is that he sees the mantle fall to the ground. And Elisha goes to the ground, and he has to decide whether to pick it up. There's your mend. Will you pick it up? It'll give you strength for the journey, if you will. Pick it up. The authority of Jesus Christ can be yours to carry, to pass on, to bring you all the way home until the whirlwind grasps you into the air with Jesus. Will you pick it up? Amen.